I'm Clara, 26, and for as long as I can remember, my mother has treated my life as if it were a cautionary tale meant to shame the family. Every gesture I made, every sentence I spoke, seemed to be a test she was determined I would fail. At dinner, she would scan the room, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear. Clara, don't make a scene. At family gatherings, she dropped those little verbal daggers with the precision of a surgeon. Why do you have to be so average, ordinary, forgettable? The word clung to me like a stain, invisible to everyone else but suffocating to me, marking me as perpetually inadequate in her eyes. I tried to understand it, tried to rationalize it. Was it her own insecurities projecting outward? Was she jealous that I dared to have ambitions that might one day eclipse her carefully constructed image of our family? I never knew, and perhaps that was part of the cruelty. She never explained, she only condemned. I worked hard. I spent countless nights hunched over textbooks, pouring my heart into papers, fighting through projects and exams that left me drained yet determined. I volunteered, I led teams, I tried to contribute in ways that mattered, yet her words never wavered. The more I accomplished, the sharper the remarks became, as if my success was only evidence of how little I understood her world. Nothing was ever enough. My victories weren't celebrated. They were dissected, measured, and minimized. It was exhausting to exist under her gaze, constantly policing my behavior, my tone, my very presence, because at any moment I could be branded a disappointment. The breaking point, though, wasn't years of quiet torment. It was the conversation that unfolded just last week, in the cramped warmth of our kitchen. I was tying my shoes, heart hammering with nervous excitement about the awards ceremony tomorrow, when she cornered me like a predator sizing up prey. Eyes narrowing, lips pressed into a thin line, she hissed, "Clara, whatever you do, don't embarrass us tomorrow. People are watching. Just stay quiet. You're average, remember? Average." The word struck with the precision of a blade, slicing past my composure and embedding itself in my chest. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of my supposed insignificance, a dismissal of every effort I had made, every late night spent proving myself to a world outside this house. I could feel my blood heating, my fingers trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. How dare she reduce years of persistence, sleepless nights, and painstaking ambition to a single flippant word? How dare she undermine me at the very threshold of recognition, attempting to strip away the pride I had earned? I wanted to speak, to argue, to scream until my voice tore through the walls of that kitchen, but even that seemed futile under her relentless scrutiny. The air between us was charged, thick with unspoken history, every word she had ever said forming a wall of judgment around me. And yet, in the midst of that suffocating tension, a different emotion began to simmer beneath the anger: clarity. It was in that instant I realized that this wasn't about winning her approval. It never had been. This was about asserting my existence, staking a claim on the person I was, on the life I had built despite the constant barrage of belittlement. The surge of anger that coursed through me was no longer chaotic or disoriented. It had a purpose. It was a spark, a promise to myself that tomorrow I would not be silenced, I would not shrink, and I would not let her words define my worth. For the first time, the rage was accompanied by resolve. I could feel it, solid and unyielding, wrapping itself around my chest and whispering, "I will show you who I really am." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with my body tense and rigid, unable to shake the weight of my mother's words. Her voice, sharp and cold, echoed in my mind. "You're average, remember?" It wasn't just an insult. It was an indictment of everything I had ever tried to accomplish, a summary judgment of my worth distilled into a single dismissive syllable. I could feel the sting of it as if it had left a bruise on my chest, pulsing with every heartbeat. Sleep felt impossible. Every corner of my room seemed to close in, every shadow a reminder of years spent shrinking under her gaze, of smiles forced, opinions censored, and dreams minimized. I remembered dinners where my accomplishments had been dismissed with a glance, family gatherings where my enthusiasm was met with sighs, my ideas subtly undermined until I questioned my own instincts. Even when my father had tried to soothe the tension, his attempts had been awkward, tentative, and, ultimately, ineffectual. He seemed trapped, unwilling or unable to confront her, caught in the quiet calculus of keeping peace while silently witnessing my humiliation. The isolation of it all sank into me, a heavy, suffocating blanket that left me aching for someone to see me, truly see me, and acknowledge that I mattered. Tears came in slow, relentless streams, unbidden and hot against my cheeks, carving paths down my skin. I cried not only for myself, but for every version of Clara that had been silenced over the years, every idea quashed, every voice muted, every moment of triumph diminished before it had a chance to breathe. Pain swelled inside me, a bitter, sharp sensation that clung to my ribs and made my chest feel hollow and raw. The grief was deeper than embarrassment. It was a profound sense of being unseen, of being continually undervalued by the person whose opinion had shaped my earliest understanding of worth. But amid that pain, something subtle began to flicker, almost imperceptible at first, a small, defiant ember of clarity. I realized that her words, as heavy and cutting as they were, had power only if I let them. Her judgments were a reflection of her insecurities, her narrow vision of what success and dignity should look like, and not a verdict on my life, my efforts, or my potential. The clarity did not erase the hurt, but it reshaped it, transforming a portion of the raw anguish into determination. I began to see that the only way forward was to reclaim the narrative of my own life, to separate my sense of self from her relentless criticism. I thought about the award ceremony tomorrow, a culmination of years of discipline, effort, and late nights spent mastering subjects that challenged me, pushing boundaries that many had assumed I could not cross. I understood, in that quiet, tear-stained moment, that I could not allow her cynicism to rob me of the pride I had rightfully earned. My achievements existed independently of her approval, and for the first time, I resolved that they would speak for me. Clutching the sheets around me, I made a silent vow. Tomorrow, I would not shrink. Tomorrow, I would honor the work, the sacrifice, and the persistence that had brought me here. Tomorrow, I would let my life, not her judgment, declare my worth. The pain remained, sharp and lingering, but beneath it, a quiet resolve hardened into something unbreakable, a determination that I would no longer be diminished by anyone's measure but my own. The auditorium buzzed with a nervous, electric energy that made my chest tighten. Parents whispered to each other in anxious anticipation, their eyes scanning the stage and the program, checking names and schedules as though tomorrow itself depended on my performance. Professors in tailored suits shifted their weight in the front rows, clipboards and notes in hand, while classmates fidgeted, exchanged smiles, or whispered teasing remarks about the awards and recognitions that awaited them. Every corner of the room seemed alive with expectation, and yet I felt as if the world had contracted to the width of the stage, the space between the podium and the first row of seats. My mother sat there, stiff as a mannequin, arms crossed, jaw set in rigid determination, as if her glare alone could bend reality and force me to fail, force me to shrink, to disappear. I could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline, that flickering of fear and doubt that always accompanied high-stakes moments. But this time it was tempered by a different force, a quiet, unwavering resolve. For years, her voice had haunted me, her judgment hovering like a shadow over every accomplishment, every step forward. But now, the fear that had once weighed me down had transformed into something sharper, a clarity, a sense that my life, my work, and my effort had intrinsic value independent of her opinion. My heart raced, not from trepidation, but from the recognition that this was my moment, and no one, no lingering specter of criticism, no shadow of doubt, could diminish it. The call for my name cut through the chatter like a bell, precise and resonant, Clara Thompson. My breath caught, my hands clenching the program so tightly that the paper crumpled slightly beneath my fingers. I rose, my legs carrying me forward with purpose, each step steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. The stage seemed brighter than I remembered, lights reflecting off the polished wood, glinting like tiny, impartial witnesses to the culmination of years of study, struggle, and silent perseverance. I looked toward the podium, where Dr. Mitchell stood smiling, the warmth in his eyes a quiet affirmation that my work had not gone unnoticed. Mom's eyes narrowed, sharp as daggers, clearly anticipating my faltering, waiting for the moment I would trip over a word. Let the weight of her scorn crush me into hesitation, but I didn't falter. My chest lifted, shoulders squared, as if the very act of holding my posture defied years of belittlement. I breathed in, slow and deliberate, centering myself in the middle of the moment, letting every second of preparation, every late night of study, every ounce of determination converge into presence. I could feel the anticipation of the crowd pressing against me, a tangible energy that could have been overwhelming, except that it was also liberating. Each pair of eyes, strangers and familiar faces alike, became witnesses not to my fear, but to the reality of my effort, my persistence, my worth. I was no longer just Clara, the daughter who embarrassed the family. I was Clara, the individual who had fought, endured, and earned her place here, who had transformed anxiety and pain into quiet strength. The first words I would hear from the dean were not just the announcement of an award, they were the affirmation of every choice, every sacrifice, and every moment I had refused to allow my mother's voice to diminish my life. As I stepped closer to the podium, the edges of hope shimmered in my chest, subtle but undeniable. This was not just about recognition, it was about reclamation, about letting my life and achievements speak for themselves in a world that had so often tried to silence me. Dr. Mitchell's voice rang clearly through the auditorium, steady, authoritative, and warm, carrying a resonance that seemed to suspend time itself. This year, the award for academic excellence goes to someone whose dedication, resilience, and leadership have truly set them apart. Clara Thompson. The words hit me like a jolt of electricity, and for a moment, everything else, the murmurs of the crowd, the shifting of chairs, even my mother's glare, blurred into the periphery. The applause that erupted was thunderous, sweeping over me in waves that pressed against my chest and lifted it with exhilaration. Every clap, every cheer, every murmur of recognition was a tangible acknowledgement of years of persistence, sleepless nights, and relentless effort. I felt it not just in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones, a confirmation that the struggle, the pain, and the doubt had culminated in something undeniable, something irreducibly mine. I glanced at my mother, expecting, perhaps unconsciously, a flicker of approval, a reluctant nod. But what I saw instead was astonishment. Shock crystallized across her face. Her skin was pale, lips slightly parted, eyes wide, as if she had just glimpsed a version of me she had never truly imagined existed. The rigidity she had worn for years, the armor of judgment, the sharpened critiques, the unspoken insistence that I was somehow less than, crumbled in that instant, leaving a raw, silent vulnerability that she had never allowed anyone to witness before. I could almost feel the weight of her disbelief pressing against me, but it no longer threatened to pull me down. As I approached the podium, each step resonated with an amplified sense of self-possession. I held my head high, shoulders back, exuding not arrogance, but the quiet authority of someone who has earned their place in the world through effort, tenacity, and integrity. My hands were steady as I reached for the award, gripping it firmly, feeling the cool, solid weight in my palms. It was more than a trophy. It was validation, a testament to my ability to rise above the relentless diminishment I had endured. Every whisper, every glance, every average that had ever landed on me seemed to dissolve into nothingness in the brilliance of that moment. The applause continued, swelling and receding in waves, and I allowed myself a smile, full and unapologetic, letting it reach my eyes. Triumph surged through me, not as fleeting elation, but as a profound, grounding certainty. I had not only succeeded, I had done so on my own terms, in a world where recognition often comes to those who are unafraid to claim it. The energy of the crowd was intoxicating, but the deepest satisfaction came from within, from the knowledge that I had proven, to myself above all, that my worth was never a matter of negotiation, never subject to the diminishment of others' narrow judgments. I caught sight of familiar faces, professors, classmates, friends, each nodding, smiling, acknowledging me in their own subtle ways. Their validation was meaningful, certainly, but it was the quiet, internal acknowledgement that mattered most. I had endured, I had persisted, and I had emerged victorious. For the first time in years, the echoes of my mother's critiques seemed distant, impotent, unable to touch the person I had become. I was not her projection, not her disappointment, not her warning to the family. I was Clara Thompson, standing in the fullness of my accomplishment, radiant in the clarity of my triumph. And in that moment, the triumph was absolute. It did not demand her recognition. It did not need her praise. It existed independently, undeniable, and complete. I was victorious not because she saw it, not because anyone else saw it, but because I had created it, claimed it, and allowed it to define me, not by her terms, but by my own. The car's engine purred beneath me, a steady, confident hum that mirrored the rhythm of my heartbeat, calm but insistent. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it with an ease that had been impossible in my childhood. Impossible in those years when every action, every choice, every word had been scrutinized, measured, and often found wanting. Today, the familiar streets blurred past in a kind of cinematic clarity. The sunlight bounced off the windshield, illuminating the dashboard and casting the interior in a glow that seemed almost symbolic, a space of control, autonomy, and, finally, quiet victory. In the back seat, my family fidgeted, their voices tentative, hesitant. Compliments spilled from their lips in halting bursts, forced and uneven, like fragments of a language they were still learning to speak. "Nice car, Clara. I mean, impressive work," my mother murmured, her words stumbling over themselves, a tremor betraying the faintest crack in her composure. My father nodded silently, his posture stiff, a polite acknowledgement that was still weighted with years of complicity, years of passive observation, while my mother's criticisms had worn me down. My siblings, usually brash and quick with mockery, offered sheepish smiles, the awkwardness in their tone betraying both guilt and amazement. I listened to them, not with bitterness, but with a kind of detached clarity. I wasn't gloating, I wasn't mocking, and I wasn't seeking revenge. Every correction, every compliment, every apology was secondary to a truth I had finally come to claim. The person they had ridiculed, the one they assumed was fragile, inadequate, or average, had never been defined by their judgment. That version of Clara existed only in their minds, a construct of assumption and condescension. What they now encountered was reality. Me, fully realized, rounded in achievement, confidence, and the quiet, unassailable dignity that comes from knowing one's own worth. The sensation of driving, of guiding the car through familiar streets, through turns and stretches I had traversed countless times in imagination, was more than literal motion. It was metaphorical, a physical manifestation of control over my narrative. I navigated not only traffic, but years of unresolved tension, of silence, anger, of doubts implanted and fostered by the people who were supposed to nurture me. With every press of the pedal, every turn of the wheel, I reclaimed fragments of myself that had long been held hostage by judgment, expectation, and fear. And yet there was something gentler beneath the triumph, a quiet relief that I hadn't anticipated. I realized that the liberation I felt didn't hinge on punishment or retribution, but on assertion. I hadn't humiliated them. I had simply allowed the truth of my life to exist visibly, undeniably, in a way they could not ignore. They were confronted not with vengeance, but with reality. I was independent, competent, and unapologetically me. My success was not a spectacle for their approval. It was a private, internal monument that only required acknowledgement from myself. As the city unfolded outside the windows, familiar and ordinary, yet refracted through this new lens of autonomy, I felt the last traces of fear and hesitation dissolve. For the first time in decades, I was moving not to please, not to evade judgment, not to appease or shrink, but simply to exist fully in my own right. The streets stretched before me like an open promise, and the hum of the engine beneath my hands became the steady beat of a freedom long denied. In that moment, every sneer, every whispered insult, every shadow of doubt was rendered irrelevant. I was free.